It's really an honor to be here. I mentioned this last time, but I have such a respect for this Makom Torah. I have many chaverim who have been here over the years, some who are now Rabbeim here. Perhaps none as dear to me as Rabbi Breidowitz. Rabbi Breidowitz, I'm one of thousands and thousands of Talmidim that he's had, secularly and in the Beis Medrash. But what I did tell him about a year or so ago is that when Torah Anytime became available to everyone in the world, my family became big Hasidim of Rabbi Breidowitz. And around our Shabbos table, we often talk about his most recent shir, and we discuss his ideas, and he's had a tremendous and continues to have a tremendous hashpah on me and my family, for which I'm grateful. But in any event, I'm extremely grateful to be here today. I just want to share with you an idea, because some of you I know probably feel this idea internally, and you're not even sure what you're feeling. Like sometimes you have, like, for women they call it intuition. Men don't have that type of intuition. It's kind of more of the hair goes up on the back of their neck, kind of an instinct kind of thing. But for many people, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a lot. The experience of just being in Eretz Yisrael is life-altering. For some people, they say walking in the hills has a roshim on them. For some people, going to Kevar's Kvar, Marsa Machpelah, or Kevar Rachel, or going to the Kosel, that's what really triggers it in them. For other people, it's simply breathing the air and knowing that you're in the land where your great-great-great-grandparents were. But they can't put their finger on it. What is it exactly? You know, you go to New York, there's air there too. Granted, the air is more tamei there, but there's air. What is it about Eretz Yisrael? What is it about the hilltops? What is it? Is it that we have a history here? What is it that makes us all feel very special here? So I'm hoping by the time we conclude this afternoon, you're going to have a much stronger understanding of what it is that we all feel, what it is that draws us here. So the amazing thing about Eretz Yisrael is that in the Torah itself, it's referred to many different ways. So the first place on the source sheet, again, if anybody wants, I have. Most of this will be from Chumash, not all of it. See if anybody wants in the back. Is a simple pasuk from Parshas Bahar. In this mitzvah, the Torah is talking about the idea of Yovel. And it says, it's underlined the relevant section, V'ha'aretz lo simacher litz masas ki li ha'aretz ki gerim v'soshav matem imadi. You can't sell the land in perpetuity. No one has the right to say, this is my chelik in Eretz Yisrael, and I'm selling it to John Smith forever. It's not like it is in Chutz La'aretz, where you own a piece of karka and you sell your property to whoever you want. That can't be done in Eretz Yisrael. After 50 years, it automatically goes back to the original owner, the chalakim for each shevet, for each tribe. And what does it say right after that, though? Ki li ha'aretz, because it's my land. Hashem could not make a more direct understanding to everyone that you should understand the nature of Eretz Yisrael. It's not like Cairo. It's not like Montana that you can buy and sell. Ki li ha'aretz. It's my land. So this is something which itself cries out for explanation, because obviously Hashem doesn't need land. What does it mean, ki li ha'aretz? But before we explain that, we're going to muddle the waters a little bit more. So the next place is in source number 2, Parshas Acharei Mos, and you'll see this is the warnings Hashem is giving Bnei Yisrael before they come in. It says, Al titamu b'kol eila nitamu hagoyim asher ani meshalech mitnechem. All the nations that were here before you did all these things. This comes after all the averos of Arias that are usher to you and all the forbidden relationships. Hashem says, don't get involved in this stuff. All the nations before you did this stuff. Vatitma ha'aretz, and they contaminated the land. Again, think about that. How do you contaminate land? I understand you can have nuclear waste that contaminates the land, and the land won't grow things anymore. But how does it get contaminated by the people's behavior? Again, referring to Eretz Yisrael in almost like a third-party sense, the third-person sense. Vatitma ha'aretz va'efkod avona aleha, and I redeemed their aver. Vateka ha'aretz es yoshveha. An unbelievable lashon. The lashon is that the land itself vomited the people out. Their behavior was so repulsive to the land that the land vomited them out. Again, clearly describing graphically how the land is its own thing. It's not just an inanimated rock. It's not an inanimated dirt that we grow pears from. The land took action and vomited them out. It's an amazing thing. So now we have two questions. First, we have Hashem talking about it's my land. And then we have him saying that it's this inanimated thing that can actually do things. The only place we ever heard such a thing was in the Shishimei Bereshis. It talks about in the Midrashim that perhaps the trees were complaining they didn't necessarily want to bring forth Paris, that somehow they had, or the sun and the moon were arguing they didn't want to, whose light was bigger. I mean, things we don't understand. But from the Shishimei Bereshis we say, okay, we don't understand. But here we are, 2,000 years into civilization, and we're talking about the land vomiting its people out. Source number 3, V'lo satame es ha'aretz asher atem yoshvim ba, asher ani shochen besocha. Now this is a whole new wrinkle that we've never had before. Hashem's saying, don't contaminate the land because I dwell there. The only other place we've heard this lashon of Hashem dwelling somewhere was when they completed the Mishkan and they said, B'shachante besocham, that Hashem can dwell with us there. And here it says, Ani shochen besocha, I live in the land. And then, just as you're getting a little bit crazier, we have, okay, it's my land, we have the land vomits it out, it's the land, it's its own thing. And then we have, don't contaminate the land because I dwell there. And then listen to this line. A fourth thing, which has nothing to do with anything. Ki ani shochen besoch b'nei Yisrael. I dwell there because I dwell amongst b'nei Yisrael. Now this is something entirely new. Hashem is telling us here of the unbreakable connection between Bnei Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. There's a connection. You want to be in Eretz Yisrael, you're going to be with the Jews. Because I dwell in Eretz Yisrael and I dwell amongst the Jews. A new thing we have. So again, a lot going on here. If you have a chance, you can flip to source number 4. Just want to muddy the waters as much as we can. Again, the underlined portion from Parashas Ekev, Ki ha'aretz asher ata bam shama l'rishta lo ke'eretz Mitzrayim. This land you're coming into is not like Egypt. Hu asher yitzasa misham. I took you out of there. Asher tizra zarecha v'hishkis baraglecha kagan yorek. In Egypt, the plants grow and everything like a garden. You know, the Nile overflows; it waters the banks of the cities, and they use that water and they grow their crops. V'aretz asher atem ovrim shama, but the land that I'm bringing you to Eretz Yisrael, l'rishta, to inherit, Eretz harim uvakolos, it's got peaks and valleys. Limtar hashamayim tishte mayim. It drinks its water directly from Shemayim. Wow. This is not some, obscure Kabbalistic source or some Rishon from the year 1200. This is a pasuk where Hashem's telling you that Eretz Yisrael has seasonal water. And sometimes you have droughts, and sometimes you have plentiness. All dependent on tefillah. Because this land, mamish, drinks from Shemayim. It's not on a schedule like Egypt. It's not going to have plentiful crops and everything, and you can count on the rain in different seasons and save it for different seasons. It's going to be here one season only, and then you have to save. And you want it to be here, you need to be on a certain madrega. But Hashem's telling you again the unbelievable Hashem-directed language that Eretz Yisrael is fundamentally different from every other land in the world. So you want to know why you feel a little different here? That's a good start. Hashem told us about this phenomenon a long time ago. Then finally, we start putting things together. Source number 5, Hashem says, this is Parsha Shoftim, where Hashem says basically something which is repeated over and over again in Sifrei Kabbalah. The idea of laleches bidrachav. Hashem wants you to walk in His ways. What does that mean, walk in His ways? Hashem doesn't have legs, He doesn't walk. What does it mean to walk in His ways? This is a central part of being a Jew, to try to emulate the attributes of Hashem. Where do we see this the most? Where do we see this idea that we're supposed to be like Hashem to the extent possible? We're supposed to copy His midos. I'm sorry? Absolutely. Chesed's a great example. As a matter of fact, many of the Mefarshim describe Brias Ha'olam being founded from Chesed. The way they exactly describe it is that Hashem is this ultra concentrated source of goodness. That's his Metzias, his goodness. And what happens if you take something that's ultra concentrated, you put it in a beaker, and you put a cover on it, and you heat it up, what's going to happen? Come on, all you scientists here, you know what's going to happen? It'll explode, exactly. So the Sifrei Kabbalah describe this Hashem's inability to contain his chesed. Wow. And that's where the world came from, which, by the way, if you get into the details in the Sifrei Kabbalah, it is remarkably reminiscent of what they teach the Big Bang and how it happened. Right. And I'm not a big science guy, and I'm not telling you that science is the ticket to everything. I am telling you, though, that don't throw out science either, because the more science catches up to the Torah, the more of a Kiddush Hashem it is. You realize that what we have in the Torah and the Gemara and everything else was way ahead of them. And every 25 years they make a new discovery, which you find in the pages of the Gemara. So the science catches up to it. But the Kabbalah, the way they describe the origins of the universe, are very much like the Big Bang. So you can't throw out all the science necessarily. They do catch up. But here, this idea, there's another place where we see a tziva, a mitzvah, that we're supposed to be like Hashem. Is it jumping into anybody's head?
Holy.
Sorry?
Be holy.
Be holy is a perfect example, not the one I was thinking of, but we have it multiple times in the Torah where Hashem says, V'hiskadishem, I made you holy, ki kadosh ani. He says it right out, because I am holy. But there's one place where it graphically comes. It's the first place it shows up in the Torah. Hashem tells us about Shabbos. I rested on the seventh day, therefore you should rest on the seventh day. Can you explain this to me? Hashem created the world in 6 days. He rested on Shabbos. I didn't create the world in 6 days. Why am I resting on Shabbos? Hashem's immortal. I'm not immortal. Why am I doing this? And there's perhaps nothing more than the three things that were mentioned here. The midah of chesed, the idea of viskadishem, of being holy, and the idea of Shabbos, of the idea that much of the Torah is to get us to be lalechas bidrachav, to follow in the ways of Hashem. Hashem wants us to emulate his midos. Why? Separate discussion for another shir. You have to be 40 years old at least to come, and it'll take us about 3 months to get started. But I'm happy to do that another time if you'd like. We'll all take a neder of tainus, we'll learn all day, we'll eat at night, and we'll start the ideas of the whys, if you're interested. But for now, we're going to accept it at face value. Hashem wants us to emulate his behavior. This is what Hashem craves in Brias Ha'olam, that we should be like him to the extent possible. Now, something a little closer to home. I'm going to tell you about a nace that happened here in Eretz Yisrael right in front of my eyes. It's still happening, but not quite as graphically it was when I was here. When I was learning in yeshiva here in the late 80s, I remember this is the first time I was in Eretz Yisrael. I came as a 17-year-old, and I'm taking the Sheirut ride from Ben Gurion up to Yerushalayim. And I saw nothing but bombed-out vehicles and sand and rubble. They hadn't built a tunnel yet. There wasn't a tunnel in Eretz Yisrael until the 90s sometime. And much of the land was a wasteland from wars and various other things. And the first time I went to the Yam HaMelech, now this is a real wasteland. Nothing but desert, mountains all the way around. You couldn't grow a weed of grass. But it said in the Navi, it told us in source number 6, Hashem will make it plenty for you here. You're going to have much. Your crops will grow, your animals will grow. That's when he brings us back. After the Tocha, Hashem says you're going to be exiled from your land. The land will lay barren. But when you come back, everything will grow again. This is a phenomena which, first of all, makes no agricultural sense. You can't have a land that's fertile for 1,000 years, then unfertile for 300 years, absent some type of nuclear poisoning. That is exactly what's happened in Eretz Yisrael over the last 2,000 years. When Bnei Yisrael's here, everything grows, and it's amazing what happens. I went down to the Yam HaMelech for the first time in, 30 years, a few years ago. There's orchards growing in a desert. It's unbelievable. I would not have believed it possible. It rains 3 days a year there. Oh, sure, they've got the irrigation and they've got aqueducts and all kinds of stuff to bring the water down there. Yeah, they didn't have these inventions 30 years ago. They didn't have them 50 years ago. They didn't have 75 years ago. Even better. Gush Katif, you may remember, a number of years ago, the government decided the Gush Katif should be returned to the Arabs. Gush Katif was this green luxury paradise on the banks of the Mediterranean, on a part of the Gaza Strip. It was lush greenery, everything growing there. They sent wine, they sent grapes, everything out of Gush Katif. The government decided to give it back. The Arabs took it over. There's nothing growing there. You can't grow a weed because of exactly what the Torah said. This is a land that's tied to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It has ties to Hashem. What does that mean? He controls it. And he says for the Jews, it'll be fertile. God was the first racist, I guess. Right? For you, it'll be fertile. Any other nation comes in here, it won't. You don't act the right way when you're in Eretz Yisrael, you get vomited out. I have a personal connection. Ki li haaretz. It's my land. None of this makes any sense, but it's real. It's not even real in the abstract. It's not real in Amunah. It's real in practicality as to what we have seen. I have something else. I didn't make it as part of your exhibits, but just to describe what other people have said. This is a quote from Mark Twain. Mark Twain, the famous literary from the 18th century, 19th century, he once wanted to visit Palestine. He'd heard so much about it. It's the source of everything in the Bible and this and that. And he writes, a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given wholly over to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. A desolation is here that not even imagination can grace with the pomp of life and action. We never saw a human being on the whole route. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, those fast friends of the worthless part, whatever, that goes on and on. Mark Twain describing how barren Eretz Yisrael was when he came in the 18th century, or the 19th century. I think Mark Twain was around 1818, whatever it was. It's unbelievable. Is this the land that you're living in? Granted, there might be places in San Diego that are a little bit more lush. There may be. But you go up to the Golan, and you go up to the Galil, you go to the Yam HaMelech, for goodness sakes, and everything's growing everywhere. It's not the way it was for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Exactly like the Pasuk said. The Pasuk said that when I drive you out of Eretz Yisrael because of your Chatayim, this land will not work for anybody else. It only works for you. This is not something we're imagining. Our connection to Eretz Yisrael is very, very special. So let's try to understand this a little bit. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey through Midrashim and things of that nature to try to explain this phenomenon. So many of you have probably heard of something called the Even HaShasiyah. The Even HaShasiyah, roughly translated as the foundation stone. There are many people of both Arab and Jewish descent which believe that that is the dome, the rock underneath the dome of the rock. It refers to the rock, which is the Even HaShasiyah, the foundation stone. I don't know. I'm hardly an expert archaeologically. I don't know. The Sfarim say different things about it, but the Sfarim are basing it on 1,000 years ago. I don't know. But that's the Masorah from both religions to many parts. That's the stone where Avram brought Yitzchak for a carbon. It's where Yaakov saw the Malachim going up and down the ladders. It's where the Beis HaMikdash was. This is a central place. In Sifrei Kabbalah, it describes the Even HaShasiyah as the original place of creation. That when Hashem formed the earth, it was formed from one spot and then it grew out from there, whatever that means. The Even HaShasiyah is a very big deal. And they describe that this is where it was, on Har Bayis. Similarly, we know that, again, some of this is Kabbalistic, but there's many other Rishonim that talk about it very specifically, which is the idea that Hashem, in order to create our world, had to first create a barrier. because you've probably all seen fictional depictions of a nuclear explosion going off. It just levels everything around it. It's such a force that nothing can withstand its power. So the Mefarshim often explain that if Hashem was here in all of his honor and glory, there'd be no room for anything else. If Hashem was here, the power of his force would be so overwhelming, nothing else could exist. No trees, no vegetation, no people, no air. Everything would just be blown away by his presence. So when Hashem created the world, the first thing he had to do was create a barrier between himself and the world. And the way the Mefarshim explained it, that Hashem withdrew 99.9% of himself behind what we refer to as the Tzimtzum, the Great Barrier, and left either an imprint or a small piece of himself in this world. You may remember from Sefer Bereshis and Parshas Bereshis, it says that we were created B'Tselem Elokim. What does that mean, created in God's image? So again, there's this question whether there's an imprint of Hashem on us or whether there's actually a piece of Hashem in us. But either way, there's a powerful connection between Hashem and the people that he created. That's his, to whatever extent Hashem has a physical manifestation, the 0.00001% of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that possibly has some form of physical manifestation, that's people, us. And the same thing was true for everything Hashem created in the world, including land. Many pieces of land are nothing but places to plant crops and trees and grass. And you grow your food from them, and you build your houses on them. But there's a piece of land that Hashem identifies with much more closely, because either there's an imprint of him or a piece of him, whatever that means, involved personally in the land. And that place is Eretz Yisrael. This is Kili Ha'aretz. It's my land. What you're feeling, what you're tasting, what you're smelling when you walk and when you breathe here is not your imagination. It's real. We might not understand it completely. We're doing our best that we can. You know, I had a Rav for many years. I think Rabbi Breidowitz knows him. I'm sure he does. Rabbi Hauer from Shul in Baltimore. Hauer is a huge Talmud Chacham. He described this once to me in an unbelievably beautiful way. He said, you know, there's a Mishnah that says that if you look up from your learning to appreciate a landscape or something like that, it doesn't say a good thing. It's not a good thing to do. You shouldn't lift up your head from your learning or from your davening to appreciate a mountain or something of that nature. I never understood this, because who isn't inspired by Kadosh Baruch Hu's Bria? Who isn't inspired by nature? So listen to the way Rabbi Hauer touched this up. It's beautiful. He says, you ever go into an art gallery, go to the Louvre Museum in Paris, and you see, and again, I don't want to insult anybody, I'm just not on your madrega, but I appreciate art as much as anybody, but I'm not a junkie. But there's some people, when they go to a museum, it's like, wow. And then they get a little closer and look at it from a different angle, and then they take a side view, and then they back up, and they can stare at the same painting for 2 hours. From every angle, from close, from far, and these people are clearly being inspired. Imagine someone's doing this. You got one of these junkies who's looking at the art, and someone comes in and taps him on the shoulder and says, oh, do you like that art? He goes, it's unbelievable. He goes, I painted it. That's wonderful, but right now I'm looking at the art. Said Rabbi Hauer, that is pshat in this Mishnah. You're learning Torah, you're davening, you have a chance to talk directly and learn directly from the source. You want to look at his handiwork? You want to look at the art that he made, the mountaintop? You're a tippish, you're not using your head properly. You have a chance to talk and learn directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you're going to look around at a mountaintop? Yeah, there's a mountaintop, it's nice, and you can appreciate it other times, but not when you're learning, not when you're davening, and you have a chance to interact directly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not the time, you're a tippish. You have a chance to communicate directly to the source. You say, not now, I'm looking at the painting. Makes no sense. But it's a beautiful mashal, a beautiful mashal. And many of the other Rishonim say, to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, This is the only way that we can even have half of an understanding, not even half, 0.001% again of an understanding. You want to understand the Kadosh Baruch Hu? Yeah, there's Sifrei Kabbalah, write all kinds of stuff about it. You guys aren't learning much of that yet, I understand. But you're all really bright guys, and you want to understand, what am I doing, right? There's intellectuals among you. So you have no hope. There is no hope to understand a Kadosh Baruch Hu on a level that's really satisfying. However, when you look at a piece of art, you get a little bit of an insight into the person who painted it. When you hear a piece of music, you get a little insight into the composer. You want to understand a little bit about a Kadosh Baruch Hu? Look at the Welt that he created. Look at the world that we live in, how it works. And look at the Torah he gave us, which is the instruction manual. You know, you go now and you buy a piece, what do they call them, earbuds, something, the earphones? You have a choice. You can either get a CD for the people that are really old and put it in a media player and have 3,000 pages of instructions about how everything with these earbuds work. Or they can give you a website to go to which can similarly take up years of your life to fully understand the nature of how the earbud and how to get maximum performance out of them. Forget about a car which comes with an owner's manual page to tell you how to turn your windshield wipers on. I mean, you can't buy a light switch now that doesn't come with manuals and all online of all. Can you imagine that Hashem would create the world and have no instruction manual? It's like giving a 9-year-old the keys to the car. You gotta be crazy. The Torah is our instruction manual. Hashem gave us an instruction manual how to live. As a matter of fact, at the beginning of Parshas Bechukosai, it says in Bechukosai Telechu Mitzvosai Tishmaru Vasisem Osam. You do the mitzvahs. What does Hashem promise after that? What's going to happen if you keep the mitzvahs?
You should live in the land.
Live in the land. Great reward. It's a good start.
Rain in its time.
What's that?
It'll rain in its
It'll
time.
rain in its time. In short, he promises you good crops, good peace in the land. You'll be peace in the land. You'll have good families. You'll grow. All these brachos. And what are those brachos of? Olam Hazeh. The promise of Olam Haba dwarfs what we get in Olam Hazeh. But the promises in Bechukosai are specifically about Olam Hazeh. You want to have a beautiful life. You want to have beautiful families. You want to have abundant crops. You want to have wealth. You want to have all these things that human beings crave. In Bechukosai telechu uv'mitzvosai tishmoru vasisem osam. Hashem's telling you. It's an instruction manual. You'll be in Eretz Yisrael. And what happens when the Jews are in Eretz Yisrael? Everything grows. That's just a historical fact, not just a promise from the Torah, just. It's a historical fact now. But to achieve this level, we need to emulate Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'lachas b'drachav. We have to walk in Hashem's ways. It's not a coincidence that many of the mitzvahs in the Torah are ben adam l'chavero. The way we act towards each other. Why does Hashem care? Why does he care? Does Hashem care? Hashem is this unrelatable figure. He's not corporeal. He's not linear. He's not mortal. Why should he care? Again, another subject for a long time, but I want you to at least leave with one thing that you're absolutely sure about. He does care. And in case you're not sure, I'll point it out to you. I didn't put these on my source sheets, I don't think. But at the end of Parshas Hazinu, Hashem tells us that there'll come a time when you do all the Averos and you'll be exiled from the land. But I will bring you back. And he says, why? He says, because otherwise the Ummah Ha'olam will say that there is no God. That's what he says. He doesn't want the other nations to say that there is no God. This is a novel idea. Hashem cares about what the Goyim are going to say. And this was not some editor's reprint. This same logic was used 2 other places in the Torah. After the Chet HaEgel by the golden calf, He says, Moshe Rabbeinu makes his tefillah to Hashem, don't wipe out Bnei Yisrael like you said you were going to do, because the Mitzrim will say you didn't have the power to sustain them in the Midbar, therefore you killed them in the Midbar. Don't kill Bnei Yisrael because of what the Mitzrim will say. What do we care what the Mitzrim will say? What does Hashem care what the Mitzrim will say? I don't know, but he does. I don't know why he cares, but he does. After the Meraglim, Moshe again is davening for the people. What does he say? No, the Umas Ha'olam will say, the other Goyim in Eretz Yisrael will say, you didn't have the power to conquer Eretz Yisrael, so you slaughtered them in the desert. Don't kill them, because that's what the nations of the world will say. And what happened? Hashem said, you're right. A good taina. By the Egel and by the Meraglim. By the spies and by the golden calf. The same argument used by Moshe Rabbeinu. Don't wipe out Bnei Yisrael because of what the Goyim will say. Same thing Hashem himself said in Hazinu. That I'll bring you back to the land so people won't deny my existence. This is an unbelievable thing. Why does Hashem care what the Goyim think? Again, I don't know, but he does. And for some reason, we are the lens through which the Goyim perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we are Matzliach, another Pasuk in Akev, when we are Matzliach, what do the Goyim say? Because they follow the mitzvahs, that's why they're being Matzliach. What's the opposite of that? You would think the opposite of that is that when Klal Yisrael is not being Matzliach, it's because they're not keeping the mitzvahs. But that's not what Hashem says in Hazinu. He says when we don't keep when we are not Matzliach, what do the Goyim say? Not that it's because we didn't keep the mitzvahs, because there is no God. We are the vehicle through which the Goyim view the world. And by the way, this is an obvious thing if you stop to think about it. Why is the entire world obsessed with a little tiny piece of land in the Middle East? Jews represent 1/4% of the world's population. 1/4%. Did you know they've won 20% of all the Nobel Prizes since 1900? How does 1/4% of the population win 20% of the Nobel Prizes? And it's not just in medicine, by the way, I know. In the Jewish world, a fetus isn't considered viable till its third year of medical school. But it's not just in medicine, in art, in literature, and music. So modern people would say it's because Jews have been creatures of privilege, they have disproportionate wealth, and they forget there was a Holocaust in the 1900s. They forget that Jews weren't allowed into various, even in America, the golden world of Jews, right, where all this wealth is accumulated. In 1950, you couldn't get a job if you were a Jew in America. That's why they all became businessmen. Any Jew who wanted to go to Hollywood, a secular Jew, wanted to become a comedian, they had to change their name. All of these guys, Buddy Hackett, George Carlin, names from the 50s, 60s, famous people in Hollywood, all Jews, they all had to change their name to get a job. It wasn't until the 70s, late 70s, when people like Geffen, Spielberg, Katzenberg all of a sudden started showing up with Jewish names in Hollywood. It wasn't permitted, you couldn't get a job. Jews didn't have privilege in America for a long time. My wife and I went to an exhibit maybe 15, 20 years ago at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. The whole exhibit was on Jewish emigration, about Jews coming to America. Very historical from the early 1700s, some came with Columbus even, and others who came later on, various times in poor times in Jewish history in Europe. And it was basically a very flattering exhibit about Jewish emigration and how Jews had picked themselves up from nothing and made something of themselves. One of the artifacts that they had at the exhibit was a credit report from the W.R. Dunn and Company, which was the precursor to Dun & Bradstreet. The first credit reporting company, I think this was from the early 1900s, maybe the late 1800s. The W.R. Dunn and Credit Report was filing a report for a Mr. Strauss who wanted to borrow some money. He was the eventual founder of the Levi Strauss Denim Company. And he wanted to borrow some money. This is what his credit report said. Generally has a good reputation for paying back his creditors on time. However, his ancestors did loot the crown jewels of Egypt and never paid them back. This is an actual credit report. We laugh about it. You have no idea what life was like for Jews in America until 1960. No idea. But somehow they're winning 20% of the Nobel Prizes. By the way, I'm not pointing this out so that we should all aspire to win Nobel Prizes. We have more important work to do. But it's a fact that cannot be overlooked. And this, I think, you really get from the end of Parshas V'Eschana. Hashem says three psukim very close together. He says, Am Kadosh. The Jewish people are an Am Kadosh to me, a holy nation. An Am HaNivchar, Asher Bachar Mikol Ha'amim, the nation that I chose. And he refers to us as an Am Segula, a treasured people. That's quite a heap of praise. Now, fortunately, I was born Jewish. I read all these things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says about the Jewish people. We're an Am Segula, a treasured people. We're a special people. We're a chosen people. I lean back and say, well, I'm all that. Is that why Hashem's telling us these things? Contrast that with Moshe Rabbeinu. What do we understand Moshe Rabbeinu? What do we say about him? Anav Mikol Adam. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Anav there ever was, more humble than any other person. How does that happen? Moshe Rabbeinu is a pretty bright guy. Does he see anybody else talking to Hashem? Face to face? Was there anyone else up on Har Sinai getting the Torah? Was there anyone else splitting the sea? Moshe had to know he was extraordinary. There's no way around it. The fact that Yidden are special does not mean we get to sit back and say, we're all that. It gives us a greater achrayus. Some of you in here are phenomenal at math. Some of you are talented musically. Some of you are great young budding Talmidei Chachamim are going to become Rosh Yeshivas. Everybody has talents. Everyone has talents that are mimayla minateva in this room, simply because you're part of the Jewish people. It's an amazing responsibility, amazing achrayus. It doesn't mean you get to sit back. It means you have to maximize the most out of the kochos that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you, hopefully to help the klal. Give you some example of this. A guy wants to be a thief. What does he do? He gets himself a gun, he goes into his neighborhood liquor store and he says, stick him up. And he makes off with $180. We have Bernie Madoff. Jews don't mess around. We don't do things little. A guy wants to sell stolen merchandise, he goes to a pawn shop and makes off with $50 for a ring that he stole. We have people selling body organs. We sell livers and kidneys on the black market. We don't mess around. There's a reason that when an Arab dictator needs an eye transplant, he goes to see Dr. Goldshine at the NYU Medical Center. There's a reason why when they need a heart transplant, they go see Dr. Goldfeder. It's not a coincidence. Hashem tells us in the Psukim that this is our midah, that everything we do is magnified. Everything we do, we excel, for good or for bad. It's a tremendous responsibility. Hashem said, whatever you do will make a bigger difference than normal. So getting back to where we are. There's these questions that we haven't answered. Eretz Yisrael is clearly different. Not only is Eretz Yisrael clearly different, it's animated, it's inanimated. Not only does Eretz Yisrael have a connection to the Jewish people that Hashem is shochen among us, and that's why he's shochen in Eretz Yisrael. Not only that, but for us the land produces and it doesn't produce for anyone else. So take a look at what's on source number 7. I'm sorry, source number 9, I believe it is. Yeah, source number 9 in the back page. This is some quotes from Eicha. Eicha Yashva Vadad, referring to Yerushalayim. Ha'ir Abasi Haisa Kalmana. It sits lonely, Yerushalayim. This is the time after the Churban. Like an almana. Interesting choice of words. Could have described Eretz Yisrael's barren, beaten state in many ways. And the Navi describes it as an almana. The state of an almana is a very special state, a widow. In many places, the relationship between a Kadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael is described as that between a chassan and kala. Kabbalah Torah was our chuppah when the Jewish people were married to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Interesting that the Navi uses the lashon of a widow when describing Yerushalayim, when the Yidden were forced out. There's a connection. It may sound a little bit corny for people that haven't been here too long, but we belong here. We have a connection to here, so that when we're not here, ki almana, Eretz Yisrael is like an almana. Bocho tivcha balayla. This is again the land acting in an animated fashion. The land is crying out at night. What is the land crying for? What does the land care? The same reason it vomits its people out. The land has a kesher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The land has a kesher to us. And it cries when we're not here. Ein lo minocha mikol ha'aveha. You feel, you read the words of Eicha, the pain of the Navi describing the pain of Eretz Yisrael, not just the pain of the Jews in being exiled from Eretz Yisrael, but the pain of Eretz Yisrael because the Jewish people aren't here, because it's missing its partner. We are two parts of one larger whole. We each have this special connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mikol Eretz, from all the land, only Eretz Yisrael has that connection. And from all the animated creatures on the world, only the Yidden have this connection. Everyone has a connection, but the special connection, the Am Segula, the Am Hanivchar, the Am Kadosh that Hashem describes, has a special connection. And the land perceives that. This is my soulmate. These are the people that are supposed to be with me here. And when they're not here, I'm lonely. Yoshva Badad. It's lonely without us. It cries at night because we're not here. And it feels like an almana, like a widow. Two parts of one whole. And in case you think that, listen, this Fink guy's a little crazy, a lot of people know that. Maybe he's making all this stuff up. I'm going to read you one pasuk from Koheles, which you've all heard, which makes the point crystal clear, and you've probably never noticed it before. What do we say at the end of Koheles and other places? Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kikedem. We're asking Hashem to return us to Eretz Yisrael like it was before. We want to have a Beis HaMikdash again. We want Mashiach to come. We want to be able to bring karbanos. We want to live in the land with proper malchus. Do we say Hashivenu Hashem le'Eretz Yisrael? No. That's not the tefillah. We don't ask Hashem blindly to return us to Eretz Yisrael. The tefillah is Hashivenu Hashem elecha. Return us to you. Because when Jews are acting like Jews, when Jews are following the instruction manual, when Jews are following the Torah, then it's inevitable that we end up in Eretz Yisrael. This is where we belong. The only time we're not here is when the land has to vomit its inhabitants out, when it aren't behaving properly, when we aren't keeping the mitzvahs properly. That's when the land separates itself from us, as painful as it is. And that's the tefillah. We want to come back to Eretz Yisrael. We want to have a Beis HaMikdash. We want to have proper malchus. Hashivenu Hashem elecha. We ask Hashem, bring us back to you. Let us be proper Jews again. Let us keep Shabbos properly. Let us keep kashrus properly. Let us do all the mitzvahs properly. Then everything's back to the way it should be. So I hope that from now on, whether you're here for another month, another year, another 20 years, another 50 years, for the rest of your lives, whatever it is, whenever you have the schus to walk a step in Eretz Yisrael, to take a breath in, and you're wondering why you feel different in Eretz Yisrael, this is why. You have a connection to this land. Hashem has a connection to this land. You are the Am Kadosh, the Am Hanivchar, the Am Segula. You have special kochos. It would be fascinating if we did this 50 years ago and mapped out the lives of the people that were learning in this Beis Medrash 50 years ago and see where they are today. You'll see it's incredible how disproportionate their accomplishments are in the Torah world and in the secular world. And it's going to be the same with everyone here. You have different kochos. And I've no doubt that all of you are going to be Talmidei Chachamim, but some of you are going to be Gevaldi Rosh Yeshivas. Some of you may even teach at Ar Sameach. But that potential is here because, like Eretz Yisrael, it has the ability to turn on that faucet for us. I think we have just a couple more minutes, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
How do you convey these ideas without, I mean, it's like not politically correct, that, you know, this is our land, and like what is your best response to people who may be against these ideas?
It's not easy. It's getting harder all the time because you're not even allowed to call a man anymore in America. That's the idea. The idea is Rika Sol. We want to blur everything so there's nothing so certain. I'll tell you one more story if I may. I hesitate to say it here, but it really answers your question. When I was a boy here in the 80s, I was always very much interested in what was going on in the world. And in those days, we didn't have cell phones, so you didn't have any means of knowing what was going on. The only real English-speaking newspapers here, they had the USA Today International Edition, and they had the International Herald Tribune. Used to sneak a baseball score every now and then to find out how the teams were doing. But there was one other English newspaper. For those of you who are in America these days, you'll know that there's a big propaganda network for the Arab world called Al Jazeera. Well, in those days, they didn't have all types of communication networks. They had newspapers and they had radio. And the newspaper was Al Jazeera in print. Same propaganda as today, but it was in print. And at various stores in Yerushalayim, you could get these international newspapers. And I was walking by once and I saw the big headline on Al Jazeera was that Jews think that Arabs are animals, which caught my eye. And again, in those days, even more than now, it was a particularly heinous accusation because that's how Hitler described the Jews to his people in order to justify, you're not killing people, they're not really people. So the attempt to call Jews dehumanizers was so I was curious and I had to read the article. And again, forgive me, a little bit of the article is a little bit graphic, but I think it's an important lesson. The article goes on to say that in those days there was incursions from Lebanon, and people in the northern part of the country, particularly in Kiryat Shmona, were spending 3-4 months at a time in bomb shelters. The kids had no school. It was not a normal life. They had these Katyusha rockets, which they got their hands on, where they could randomly shoot into these northern cities, not knowing where they're going to hit. And the bomb sirens are going off every day. And finally, the government got tired of it, the people got tired of it, and they sent in 10,000 to 20,000 soldiers into southern Lebanon. And it was miserable because they knew they'd have to go door to door to door to find these rocket launchers. They're in the beds of trucks, they're in people's backyards, they're portable. So it wasn't like they could go to an army base. So they literally had to go door to door, and that's what they did. They swarmed through southern Lebanon, the Israeli army, and they got rid of the rockets. And Kiryat Shmona largely returned to normal. You read the newspaper in Al Jazeera, in the history of the world, there has never been a time where an army went door to people's villages, and the Jews come here, and they wouldn't even rape our women. I'm not kidding you. And again, I'm sorry to talk so graphically in here. This is what the newspaper said. The Jews must view Arabs as subhuman because they refuse to rape the women. It can't be because perhaps Jews have a great moral code inside of them. Even the most secular Israeli is someone that I would faster trust to babysit my children than any guy. There's certain things Jews just don't do. There's an Am Segula, there's an Am Kadosh, and as much as some people try to reject it in the secular Jewish world, you can't. It's part of who we are. But the only understanding a guy can have is that it must be that we view them as subhuman. In the history of the world, there has never, ever, go back to the time of Alexander, go back to Genghis Khan, any great conqueror there ever was. There's never been an army that ever informed the other side of what its next targets were going to be to try to minimize human casualties. That has never happened anywhere in the world. The only country that has ever done that is Medinas Yisrael. These are not people with big yarmulkes and long beards making these decisions. These are largely secular Jews. And you can say maybe they do it for public opinion and for political reasons, but at the end of the day, it's largely secular Jews who want to try to every extent possible to preserve human life. When there's a tsunami in a country that hates the Jews, where's the first country that sets up a field hospital? It's always Israel. It's always Israel. Whether it's an earthquake or any other tragedy, it's always Israel that immediately sets up a field hospital. And what do the Goyim say? Do they see it? I used to laugh. Netanyahu would go and make a presentation at the UN about all these things that the Jews are doing. They're not interested. You're not going to convince them. This is not a rational discussion. Literally in one newscast in the 80s, I recall the United States was enforcing a no-fly zone over Iraq after the Desert Storm War, whatever it was called. And they enforced a no-fly zone for several years. The Iraqis were not allowed to fly any military aircraft. And occasionally what would happen, the government would test the resolve and they'd send up a plane. And what would happen? The United States military would shoot it down. Well, interesting thing about shooting down planes is that they're made out of steel. And when you shoot them down, you know what happens? They land somewhere. What happens when they land somewhere where it's unfortunate and somebody gets killed? In literally the same newscast, for the United States, that's called collateral damage. When the Israeli government evacuates entire square blocks before they hit a military target with a bomb, so that nobody will be hurt. And some piece of shrapnel goes and causes somebody to have a heart attack, not even a direct impact. It's not called collateral damage. It's called a war crime. The exact same thing. The only difference is Eretz Yisrael is protecting its own land. The United States is 5,000 miles away from home. But one's collateral damage, one's a war crime. You're not going to convince people. It's not possible. However, the Torah does tell you that the world views people through the Yidden. That's how the world sees people. And when we do mitzvahs, and we're matzliach, they have no choice but to say it's because they're keeping God's will. We are mekadosh shem shemayim by living like good people. You're not going to win a debate, and you're not going to win an argument. You live by example. And that's how the Goyim see us, and that's how the Goyim perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is through us. Anyone else? That must mean that everything was so clear, there's nothing to ask on. Rabbi Breidowitz, you want to offer the rebuttal?
I'm with you.
Anyway, listen, I wish you real hatzlacha. It's a privilege to be here. And if anybody's interested in being in touch with me, whether you're here or whether you end up back in anywhere else, I'll give you my email address if you're interested in taking it down. It's David, D-A-V-I-D, E, the letter E is in Edward, David, E, Fink, F-I-N-K, @yahoo.com. I welcome your questions. We can discuss anything you like. And I look forward to hearing great things about each and every one of you. Hatzlacha.